welcome back to another episode of Hand Tool Rescue. Here today we have one of my favorite tools of all time, and it is the Goodell Company Bonanza apple peeler. It has possibly the highest gizmosity factor of any apple peeler in the history of time. Therefore, it is of high interest to me since any mechanical tools are my jam. This specific apple peeler is very expensive. It's about $1,000 US or Canadian, I believe. One of the two. It is not a cheap thing to find. Everybody wants one. And when you see this thing in operation, you will also want one. It is fairly old as well. The original patent is 1891, which puts this at the older end of tools that I've restored on camera. Rarely do I get a chance to restore something from the 1800s, although if this one was specifically from the 1800s, we don't know, but these weren't made for very long. That's why there's such a rare thing to come across, and that's why the price is so expensive. This thing has more adjustments and more parts than I think it honestly needs. It's just beyond logic, but that's why it's amazing. Right here is the part of the machine that holds the actual apple, and that stem that I'm punching out right now actually punches the core out after it's been cut by the coring blade. This piece, you see me rattling it back and forth like a psycho person. That's basically because I'm trying to figure out how this thing comes apart, and when it has sneaky threads like this, it takes time to kind of solve the mystery of why it needs to fight me the entire way. But it's just how it goes, part of the fun, and of course you don't want to break anything, so you just take it easy. Finally, with the coring blade removed, I can get the actual shaft out that I've been wanting to get out, and I'm hoping that I can get this shaft piece and the prongs on the end that hold the apple fully off. It's kind of odd how it seems to be attached, and I can't necessarily figure it out at this point, but hopefully I figure it out later. This right here is the arm that holds the coring blade. It flips up and down so you can insert an apple, and it will also hold on to the apple after it's been peeled and let it drop safely in a different area than the actual coring blade area. You don't want your hands near any kind of the sharp parts of this, so that's why this feature is there. You'll kind of see that as time goes on. Interestingly, this nut, along with some other nuts on this machine, are cast. I'm not exactly sure why it was easier for them to cast these nuts instead of just the usual process, but I guess most of the stuff here isn't really incurring a lot of forces, so the strength of the actual steel is not really of the utmost concern for an apple peeler. I keep jingling things around, trying to figure out why and where things are attached. Also inspecting the paint as time goes on. I have a feeling that this was painted previously and not the original color. The original color is a type of green. I don't think it's this green, and I don't think parts of this that are painted were originally painted. So I'm leaning towards someone spray painted this, fully assembled. Even all the fasteners, even the shafts have paint on them. It's horrendous. I really don't know what the person was thinking. Anyways, we're going to obviously rectify this today, because how dare they commit this type of blasphemy in my face. This is the cam and the little gears that run inside there that move the arm back and forth, so the blade goes from one side of the apple to the other. It's really hard to kind of imagine how this thing works without actually seeing it, so when you do see it, this will kind of all make sense. Here's another fantastically cast bolt. I wish I could find more of these. I find them interesting for some reason. And at least I finally got to use more of my giant screwdriver. It fit perfectly in this case, so yay for that. I finally have a use. You could see the kind of faint imprint of the paint that might have been sprayed. It's just really odd. Very, very odd. And even here, it looks like it was almost painted and then assembled while the paint was still fairly wet. I just... Some people don't care at my level, obviously. Here's me fighting this again. You gotta jingle all the parts. If you're not jingling, you just don't know what moves and what doesn't move. Look at that shimmy. Shimmied it right off the shaft there, and now we're in the clear. I have an idea of finally how to get this entire thing apart, and that's just to punch this shaft out. It was held in by a set screw. I'm not really sure how tight this is punched through these holes, but it was actually fairly easy to just punch this right out. I understand now why they included that set screw. It's almost barely in there. Of course, every time you're punching something, you have to take it further to the point where the actual punch itself gets stuck, and then you need a secondary punch to punch out the initial punch. It's just the way it goes. That's why I always have more than one punch. This whole assembly is the cutter, the thing that will actually peel the apples. It has a lot of weird designs that I didn't fully understand at this point in the deconstruction of this tool. You know, why things were made the way they are. I still fully don't understand why. Like, why include a brass spring for no reason other than to be fancy? There's a lot of weird stuff going on. I'm very happy that this came with an original blade. These are, not that easy to find, so if your machine happens to be missing one, you're going to end up making one. This screw didn't want to come out, so I hit it with some penetrating oil and lit it on fire. I didn't want to ruin the temper in the actual cutter part of the blade, so I got to take it easy with that. That would not be good, although I guess I could try and reharden this thing. I'm not exactly sure if I could use a razor blade in place of this blade here. It almost looks like I could, but I have no need to try that out. Maybe if you find one of these machines and put a razor blade in, please let me know. There's also something that, not necessarily missing from this machine, but an option that was available, and that was a slicer attachment. So it would peel it first and then spiral slice it. There is some photos and videos on the internet of the slicer attachment. And it's very neat, and I wish this one had it, but I guess it's just not as common. It was an extra upgrade, I'm assuming, which makes me believe it's more expensive. So it's maybe not for everyone at the time. And by at the time, I mean 1890s. And for everyone, I mean the people who can afford such a thing. I'm assuming it's an industrial, commercial setting, something like a bakery. Or maybe a more of a high processed apple company. I have no idea. It seems odd for someone who just has like a farm and wants to spend a lot of money on this machine, although it does really, really save time. So it might be worth it for some people. I need to find more information on the original cost of this machine. There's not a lot out there just because these are so uncommon. So finally the blade holder and the main shaft is off, and then I attempt to get the apple holder prongs off. I didn't know if it was threaded or not threaded or just kind of peened on or snapped on or welded or glued. Like, I have no idea. So I'm just going to let it soak in evaporust, and when it's out, even if there was just glue and has nothing to do with rust, it'll be soft just from the water in the evaporust, and everything being soft should be able to allow an easier process of getting those prongs off. Here's my lead paint test. So this will be the deciding factor on if this was or was not painted recently, and there is no lead in this case. Therefore, I am going to assume that this was recently painted with non-lead paint sometime in the last 30 years. Who knows specifically by whom, but if I do find them, I will punch them. I'm just loosely getting some of the major paint. Doesn't look like I'm taking a lot off, but I am taking the thicker paint off, just so the sandblaster doesn't get clogged. It's not good for it, obviously, and I'd rather not clean it. Here is the fancy new sandblaster, of which I've already broken the glass by smashing my head on it. So I've probably got to fix that, because I'm a smart man. Now you're probably thinking, hey, why is he doing the rust remover after the delicious sandblasting? Well, that's because evaporust darkens cast iron, because cast iron has a higher carbon content than most steels, and therefore it is brought up to the surface, quote unquote, more easily due to evaporust. So it does darken the steel or the cast iron just a little bit on the surface, and that dark, almost patina look is what I like, and I'm going to try to replicate that in this specific case, since I just would rather not paint this item. I think it would look fantastic, just completely bare steel. These bushings obviously weren't a necessary requirement for the function of this specific tool. The replacing was just more of something that bothers me when a shaft is that loose inside of a bushing. It's not good ever, really, but since it's such a low force and low speed tool, it didn't really matter, but might as well replace them if it's just an easy swap in and out of new and old bushings. The newer bushings I have are this sintered soft metal and bronze material. I don't know if it's very good. I feel like it might not be, but it is oil impregnated, so it should be fine. It just seems odd that the bronze bushing as advertised is magnetic, but I guess that's just kind of the quality of the bushing. I'm not sure. So I just punch these in and then file and cut to size, and everything's fine. These ones were the longer bushings, and I don't have any material in this exact length, so I ended up just using two of the smaller bushings back to back. You can see when I take these out, there's a tab on one of the ends that bends down, and that's actually the method they use to lock the bushing from spinning, because I'm assuming the tolerances they were kind of going for weren't really that high. And in some cases, I guess the diameters didn't match up very well, so they just went for a tab that stopped it from spinning. That's fine with me. It's 1891. Everybody relax. We don't need high performance apple peeler with insane 0.010 of an inch peeling accuracy. Not required in this specific case. And here, I could finally show you how this was attached. So it was threaded on, not reverse thread, but just normal threaded on, and it just needed a soak to finally come off. It's just a reminder to not force things to the point of breaking, and check, after rust removal if something will come apart. Everything, as usual, gets a nice brass wire wheel, getting the rest of paint or any type of dirt and the layer of evaporest that's on there is going to come off. And then we'll focus on the actual blades, which I've decided to sharpen to an unnecessary level. But I want the sharpest blade to cut these apples as possible. It does cut my hair, so that's sufficient for me. And then the actual coring blade, I'm also going to sharpen the ends and the sides. You might as well. Finally, you can see the darkened cast iron from the evaporest and the wire wheeling. I love it, and we're actually going to accentuate that further with a type of finish that I've not shown before on the channel. And it does bring out that kind of patina look, and a lot of people seem to enjoy it when I've done similar things before, so I'm hoping they appreciate this one as well. It's so much nicer putting things back together after they've all been cleaned. It makes things very simple, and I don't have to fight it the entire time, slap it around like a psycho. I'm just trying to line these two pieces up here. They were aligned initially. I don't know if you can misalign them or align them in a different way, and that has some effect on the cutter. I don't really know. I really wish I could find some documentation on this thing. Like a manual would absolutely blow my mind at this point. But I guess that's lost into the cosmos forever. This little piece, I don't know if it was originally a magnet, but it's now magnetized through the magic of science. So I'm just going to leave that, and that kind of controls the depth of cut, like the throat between the blade and that piece. So when you're peeling, you're not peeling like a 1/4 inch of the apple of thickness. Although I kind of want to try that. The risk being that I break the machine. Oh, it's only a $1,000 error. No big deal. These screws set the position, the starting position of the cutter. I'll show that a little later. I'm hitting the high spots with a brass wire wheel, and that really shines them up and gives a contrast to the darker lower spots. And I did this across the entire tool, all the pieces that have higher areas than lower areas, even the lettering. I've done this before on my hay trolley restoration, and it's fantastic. And I've done this before for clients or customers off camera before I started the YouTube channel. It seems to be something that they really enjoy. It makes it still look old and not all plasticky, but still having a nice finish to it. So at least you know it's clean and good to go. The main arm is on. A lot of these parts, I decided to go with just no oil to get them on there at first, only because the finish that I want to apply is obviously not going to stick to oiled surfaces, so I'm trying to keep it as clean as possible, and then I'll go with the oiling right before I go to use the machine. Although really in this case, nothing's moving that fast. The amount of oil that's needed is probably not a lot. I love the contrast between the brass spring and the dark gray iron. It is one of my true passions. I kind of wish the pins, the cotter pins, were copper too, or the fasteners were copper. I would be all over that. I also contemplated painting the lettering, the Bonanza lettering, in gold to kind of accent that brass spring, but I just decided against it. It's such a nicely cast Bonanza that unless you got it perfect, I don't even know if it would look the best anyways. When you paint the letters that weren't originally painted, it always just looks like you did that regardless of what the tool originally looked like. So I decided against it in that case. This was meant to stay loose and kind of float up and down very, very lightly. And this is the coring blade attachment area. So it needs to move freely. Too tight on any of these things, and we have movement issues. So I'm kind of doing just hand tight on a lot of stuff, especially because these are all adjustment mechanisms, and I will go and kind of fine tune the settings per the apple size, which is so ridiculous of a sentence. I don't think anyone in their right mind would adjust all these settings for every different sized apple they put on this machine. I feel like that immediately ruins the productivity that you paid for through buying this machine, but the settings are there for your enjoyment. Maybe you could peel potatoes or something instead. I don't know. Again, this is just hand tight because it needs to move. It can't be too crazy. All these linkages will get oil, and they'll get my usual oil, which is non-detergent 30 weight oil. If this was going into like a food production setting, maybe just using some mineral oil would have been fine. I'm not sure. The whole idea that the blades and the apple holder and the core are not stainless steel food grade material really kind of puts this into question of whether I should be using this on a daily basis, if I was to sell this to someone who was in a bakery and wanted to use it. You'd probably have to remake just at least the blades and the apple holder out of stainless steel so that it just doesn't all rust every single time you use it. Because if you wash this once with water and didn't oil it, it would just immediately rust. It's not the best design, but that's how it worked in 1891. This mechanism catches the rotating gear above it and pushes this lever down, which then pushes the coring rod out, therefore pushing the actual core out after you're done peeling the apple. You'll see that fairly soon. I just sanded very roughly and went up the grits with the handle and then hit it with some Danish oil, which is my go-to finish for a lot of things. It's just basically polyurethane and mineral spirits and some other type of oil, which is usually boiled linseed oil. And you just let it soak in and it's fine. It's good enough for what we need to do at this point. Now, there's the Danish oil can. It's just the natural Danish oil, not a version that is a specific color. You can make this yourself, both the Danish oil and the actual mix. So I'm mixing this Faltum in here, the same as I do with the material for the Japanning recipe, although this is obviously much thinner. And I'm just going to let that sit a little bit to let the blackness dissolve. I don't really want that many chunks in there. And I'm going to apply this aggressively to all surfaces, any exposed surface, even ones that aren't. And you can kind of see what it looks like now. It's a little bit shiny from the polyurethane, but it's nothing crazy. Now we get into all the adjustments. Pay attention closely. You can adjust the height, you can adjust the angle of the coring blade, you can adjust the front and back position, the depth of the coring blade for larger apples. Why? Just accept it. This is the position of the blade. You can angle it, you can move it up or down, and the top of it, like I said before, just the depth of cut, the throat opening. That screw adjusts the starting position. If I screwed it in, the blade would start earlier. And this spring applies the pressure of the cutter to the actual apple. So you can adjust the pressure if you don't want it to be so aggressive all the time, taking crazy cuts. Boom. That's it. Core out. Apple peeled. Extra delicious. There's the core pushed out again, and you're ready for your next apple. Be very, very, very easy to do, like 100 in an hour. An hour, probably. You could do way more than 100. You can see the mechanism here from the back. It's just so crazy. It's just amazing. It's just, I can't handle it. So you can see the mechanisms. You can watch them again over and over to try to figure out how in the world this was designed by one person. And one circular motion creates all of this. It's just amazing. Anyways, I'm going to be keeping this one because it is mine forever. And I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.